year-old Camp Hill community in Yorkshire. They're beautiful places, they really are. Go online and look them up. Volunteer carers work and live alongside people with learning disabilities. Now, the trust which runs the community wants to convert all the carers from volunteers. They want to make them paid staff. They say this is due to tax advice, but what it means is the shared living arrangements with residents will end. And the carers were recently served with eviction notices, and they're understandably devastated and are campaigning to have the decision reversed. And I'm delighted to welcome to the programme tonight Eddie Thornton and Catherine von Steen, or von Stein. Catherine, how do I say your surname?
Von Stein is right.
Von Stein is right, yeah. Well, look, listen, welcome to the programme, both of you.
Thank you. And
congratulations on the work that you do. And it's been going on a long time, of course. And having read this on David Icke's website last week, I was very moved by it because I didn't know an awful lot about it. What you achieve in these communities, I think, is truly, truly spectacular. And I shed a bit of a tear, to be honest, when I watched one of your documentaries on YouTube. Well, either of you can go first. Tell our listeners about Botton Village and the remarkable work that goes on there.
Yeah, thank you, Richie, and thanks for you summed it up in a nutshell. But I just wanted to add one thing, that the whole crux of this case is the rights of the learning disabled villagers of Botton and their human rights, which are being ignored. And that's the crux of our legal challenge as well. And we're hoping that something of our story over the next half hour will chime with your listeners, and they might be inclined to help us by contributing towards our legal fund to get our case before a judge.
Absolutely. Catherine, tell our listeners about Botton Village. Why is it so special?
Oh, gosh, I wish I had more than half an hour. It is the most amazing place because of the people who live here. I mean, apart from its intrinsic beauty in the North Yorkshire countryside, as you said, we're in the middle of the national park here. And over the years, the land has been looked after, cared for. People have grown and lived and died here. It is an amazing place. But what is really so special is the underlying principles, if you like, for the way of life that we live. And as you mentioned, the community started 60 years ago here, nearly. September the 5th, 1955 is when the first learning disabled adults arrived in Botton to start this pioneering community. But the actual Camp Hill impulse started a few years earlier, at the end of the Second World War, with a group of Austrian refugees, mostly Jewish, who were fleeing from the Nazi regime, and ended up in Scotland, in Aberdeen, and they wanted to start a school for children with learning disabilities. And in fact, some children with learning disabilities also fled the Nazi regime. I think we all know what happened to children with disabilities at that time. And so they started this small school for curative education for these children, and within no time at all, many more children from the surrounding area in Aberdeen had to join them, because at that time there was nothing like it. There was no education for children with disabilities. So they started this impulse there, and the Camp Hill name came from the first house that they were able to set this up in, which was Camp Hill House in Aberdeen. So it grew from there, and I have also to say that initially they had a little bit of a setback, because not long after arriving, all the men were shipped off to the Isle of Man as possible dangerous enemy aliens. Wow. So it was left to the women, and they decided to go ahead anyway. So, as with all good things, it was started by women, and went from strength to strength. And of course, what happened then ultimately was those children turned into adults, and a group of parents stood around them and said, "Okay, so now what? What happens now? You've given our children an education they would never otherwise have had. Now they need to enter an adult working life." And the only things available at that time, you can imagine, were mental institutions or to go back home, because there was no real provision, no real welfare state, etc. In the early 50s there. So a group of people decided they would get together and do this. A group of parents urged the founder, Karl Koenig, to pull some people together who would be willing to undertake this pioneering setup. And one of the children who'd become an adult was a young man called Alistair Macmillan, and Botton Hall belonged to his family. So they came to an arrangement where this community would start here, an adult working village, where these learning disabled people could come and start to live a fulfilling life.
It's amazing, Catherine. It's amazing. It sounds like
twiddling their thumbs.
It sounds like a Disney film, and it's all true. You know, doesn't it? It's the most wonderful thing. And what people need to understand, and I know a little bit about working with people with disabilities. My family were involved in the Irish Wheelchair Association for years, and I spent a lot of time when I was younger teaching children with Down syndrome to play football. And I used to often think because I studied English and history at third level, and reading about what the Nazis were doing, and what they did to people with disabilities and learning disabilities, I used to think, you know, isn't it amazing the world we live in now, the changes and how better things are. Things are never perfect, of course. No. And Eddie, I want to bring you in on this, because those people who decided to change the course of their lives and give themselves over to working with people with learning disabilities and sharing their lives with them, and these are modern day heroes, Eddie, aren't they? These were pioneering people.
Well, I believe so, and the people that are in the community today are the same. I've only been in the community for a year. I did actually come to school here when I was a child. I came to the Steiner School. I returned last April, and I've been completely overwhelmed with the love of this place, the lives of these people who devote everything to the community. It's absolutely wonderful.
That's an amazing thing. Now we got to bring it forward, and we got to talk about this dispute at the moment that's caused, Catherine. I reckon it's caused from looking at the documentary, which I watched again today, and the 30-minute one that's on YouTube that David shared. Yeah. It's caused a lot of heartache and a lot of misery in the community. What is it that this trust wants to do? First of all, who are this trust, and what are their responsibilities?
Well, the Camp Hill Village Trust was founded in 1954 as the vessel for Botton Village to be the charity that would acquire the assets and so on, and then promote the community life and the way of living. And the original trustees were people who understood the underlying principles, the reasons why the charity was founded, who created its memorandum and articles, which is all about living together, working together, sharing life, living side by side with people with disabilities, not treating them as clients or service users, but really living side by side and working together also economically in a different way, or both, well, economically, culturally, in every aspect. The underlying principle was, I get out of it what other people put into it, not what I put into it, which is a fundamentally different way of approaching life, if you like, that you don't look just to get back out of it what you put in, but actually your needs are met in every realm by the efforts of other people, and in turn you meet the needs of other people. So it's a very unselfish way of living. Now, of course, we're selfish human beings in many respects, and it's not 100% perfect. Nothing is, as you said, but that's the underlying principle and where it came from. And the Trust was founded to support communities and community life, living together, working together, and building life together side by side. And what we've seen in recent times is essentially, I would phrase it as something like a hostile corporate takeover. You know, the current trustees now that we have and the managers that have been brought in have all come from standard social care, NHS or finance backgrounds, business people. We're seeing a commoditization and commercialization of a community. And the two just are, fundamentally diametrically opposed. Yeah. And but that's not to say that there isn't a way that can't work together, because of course the community has to have an economic life. It has to have a sound financial basis. In the current climate, it also has to, because we're dealing with learning disabled adults, living and working with them, but many of those are in receipt of social care funding, so of course there's social care regulation that comes along with that, and so on, and that's all fine. And other Camp Hill communities in this country manage to work together with their charitable trusts, together with their local authorities, the funding authorities, the regulatory bodies, etc., to be compliant and nevertheless continue the Camp Hill way of life. Our trust seems to feel that that's not right, and they have an agenda by the seam of it, to wipe out the very way of life that we have,
Very distressing
and replace
to see.
it with a standard social care model.
Very distressing to see some of the residents, particularly a lady at the beginning of it, Eddie, at the beginning of the documentary, very, very upset at what the implications might be. A number of our listeners have said, that corporate takeover, there's two words that come to mind. Paul was on to say, I tell you now, they will eventually sell those houses off at a fortune, maybe to developers. Eventually, maybe that's what they want. I hope not, Paul.
Well,
Eddie, do you think, just a question on that, do you think that, Catherine said that elsewhere in the country, things are working the way they were meant to work, it's carrying on the way it was set up to carry on. You're not being used as a test case, do you think, to ultimately roll this out across the country in other such communities?
Well, the other communities are still managing to operate perfectly well. There is a agreement with HMRC that still stands, and this whole tax argument is a pretext, as is the other regulatory authorities that they continue to invoke, the Charity Commission, North Yorkshire, HMRC. Every single one of those bodies has written to Botton and saying that they categorically do not want the change.
Don't require it.
Sorry, do not require the change. But when you demonstrate the fallacy of all those pretexts, you're left with speculation, like your reader Paul was saying, and we don't know what the real reason is for this change. It could be anything from sheer incompetence. Here's a group of people who don't have any real understanding of the inner workings of an intentional community. You've got a trust that used to be made up of ex-community members, but has now got nobody that has lived in a Camp Hill, to my knowledge. And you've got a burgeoning group of executive managers and support staff who come from the conventional care setting, and maybe they just truly don't understand our community. Because how else can you say that you could replace a co-worker who devotes their entire life, they're on 24-hour day call? How can you replace that with a shift care worker on 37.5 hours? It just doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make any sense. Catherine, Michelle Olsen is listening to the programme in Dublin. Michelle works with children with learning disabilities. Mm-hmm. And she says, I wonder, could you ask your guests, she says, I wonder, is the end game here, get everybody into these contracts? Because eventually then they can let people go. Because what this is all about is about maximising profit. And eventually what they'll do is basically say, well, we don't need so many care volunteers, you don't need so many care residents, because ultimately it's all about profit. That's from Michelle in Dublin. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I think she might be onto something. There's as Eddie said, there's a number of possibilities for doing this. Why would they want to? And that wouldn't be the first person who suggested something like that. That it's an issue of control, of finance, possibly of asset stripping. Really don't know. It's hard to fathom because and it's quite incredible to think of, because this is a charity who at its heart should be looking after its beneficiaries, which are learning disabled adults, and it seems to be doing anything but. It pays scant heed to what they want, and is just seems to be pursuing its own agenda, which appears to be all about money, control, reduction of risk to the charity, and very little about the people.
Now tell me this, guys, both of you. Eddie, maybe you'll come in on this. Yeah. The community is paying for itself at the moment, isn't it? The work that the residents do, and maybe you want to talk about that for a couple of minutes, the work that's done and the money that comes in. At the moment, it's in the black.
Well, it's not, and hasn't been for quite a while, because of the changes the charity's been making for a little while. Yes. Now, one of the arguments that was brought early on is that it's about financial viability. The community in itself is not purely sustainable or purely sustained by the income it receives from social care funding, together with the income that it generates out of what we produce, both on land and in the craft workshops. And we've always relied, to some extent, on charitable donations, but that's why we're a charity.
Absolutely.
There's nothing wrong with that, really. No. One of the arguments that's constantly been used is, well, we have to rely on £1 million of legacy donations every year. Yes, but what's wrong with that? And actually, that's often put us well into the black, and then we've had a bit left over. The biggest blow to us last year was losing £1 million of social care funding that's not been replaced. And yet, costs have gone up and up. The co-worker model is actually proven to be really, really cost effective, and it's hard to see, and CVT won't give any details of any costed business plans with their replacement employment model. And when we experience daily that where two long-term co-workers and some short-term co-worker guest volunteers would be able to manage and run a household and also contribute to the workshops, and now it takes a rota of 6 or 7 shift workers coming in to do the same sort of thing.
It makes no sense.
The costs cannot possibly be sustainable in the long term.
It's madness. Andrea is one of several listeners on Twitter and on Skype who have said, you know what, this is about disabled people or people with disabilities making more money if they were in residential care. And you know what, it sickens me to agree with that, Eddie, but, obviously, this is an alternative news program. Despite the fact we're going out on commercial radio, we say things on this program that I wouldn't be allowed to say on commercial TV or radio. And I could get into, the family courts and all that. I'm not going to get into that right now. I'll do that another time. But this stinks of making money out of people with disabilities by taking them into care. Eddie, what you reckon?
Absolutely. And the quality of life that these people enjoy
is going to go down.
Absolutely decimated.
Yeah.
I mean, you see the mental health and the physical health of our residents compared to those who are living in the conventional care that you talk about. And it's sky high, much higher. And the reason is that they live in shared family homes with people that they've built real relationships with. And more than that, they work. Everybody has a job in our community that they do to the best of their ability. We've got farmers who milk the cows or harvest the vegetables. I used to work with cheese making, residents making the cheese. They bake the bread, and everyone feels worthwhile, everyone feels valued, and that gives a massive boost to one's sense of self-worth.
Catherine, there's hundreds of questions coming in. We're not going to get through all of them, but a number of people are saying, right, we've just had an election. Now, obviously, you were canvassing your Yorkshire outgoing MPs, incoming MPs, in the run-up to the election. What sort of political support have you got, Catherine, or have you not got?
Well, it's interesting. In one way, we've got quite broad cross-party political support. As you say, we were campaigning beforehand. We had hustings, and people were broadly supportive. Sadly, less so our sitting MP and re-elected MP. But what we also do have is, prior to the breakup of Parliament for the election, we got tabled an early day motion, actually brought by Caroline Lucas, the thankfully re-elected Green MP, and that had broad support. So what we're doing now is revisiting all those people who've been re-elected and the new ones who've been elected and saying, will you now put your names to this so we can get this live again? Because it is an issue. The issue actually that's being highlighted by this goes way beyond Botton. This is about the state of social care in the country, and the provision for learning disabled people, and the discrimination that goes along that. The phrasing is used, choice and control, and you must have access to this, but the reality is often severely limited by funds and resources.
Are you terrified, both of you? And this isn't me being in any way sensational, but I mean, Jesus, what can you say when you read The Independent today, and when you read what Ian Duncan Smith has got planned over the next few years here? That's just social welfare. I mean, it must be, for anybody working in charities like yours, and I'm not just saying this because I have you on, as I said, I have a bit of previous of working with people, and I know, Angel, I don't need any pat on the back for doing that. It's one of the best things I was ever involved in my life. You got to be worried about what's coming down the line, not just for yourselves, but for other really important and wonderful projects like yours.
Absolutely. But, I mean, Botton's always been fortunate, like Catherine was saying. We attract a lot of charitable donations because we are different. It's just unfortunate that our trust is completely rubbishing itself now, and we really fear that not only will the funding from our local authorities start drying up, But those charitable donations which we've relied on for the last 60 years will also start to dry up, because people will see the place for what it is, which is a conventional care home, and they'll turn elsewhere with their charitable donations.
A load of listeners are saying, Paul was on to say, in my town, this is on Twitter, where I live, they've closed mental health drop-in centres. Then they've centralised them, so they've reduced maybe 3 down to 1. They've put it miles away. And then the buildings were sold off then to private interests. You see, I've said time and time again, and you don't have to agree with this because you're not political, but they should be in prison, the people who do this, because it's an absolute outrage. And a lot of listeners are saying that. Carl was on to say, this is all part of the same plan, the same paradigm that the elites are pushing on us. It's all about control. A load of people saying that they're sympathetic. We've probably got about 3 minutes left. Now's the time, I suppose, to talk about the campaigning for funding and help. So go ahead.
Well, yeah, I mean, the next major thing, you've heard some of the major issues there and what we're really fighting for, not just Botton, but a bit wider than that. And really, we want to take this on to a next level now. We are still in a legal process. We want to fight this in any way, shape and form we can, and it seems the only recourse we have is to go to the law. We've been to court twice, which has obviously cost us a fair bit of money. We've had great donations from a lot of people, but we need a huge amount more to keep going with this, because we want to take it all the way to show that not only is this charity breaching its own memorandum and articles, but also the human rights of individual learning disabled adults are being breached. And we want to showcase that and highlight that. So we really need a huge amount of support. So, I mean, I know you have a really large listenership, and it's been wonderful to hear the letters and comments you've read out there.
That's
but just imagine if every one of your listeners could donate £1, just that tiny amount from each one, how much that would help us and help the learning disabled adults who are in this community and other communities within the charity, because the charity operates 9 centres, and there are others that are under threat as well as Botton. Botton's the biggest one, and the one that is most in the firing line at the moment, but there are many other lives being affected by this too.
Bertha
and we also want to ensure there's a really bright future for Botton, and a real alternative to the standard social care structures that we've just talked about that really don't serve and support learning disabled adults in the way they should be. And we want there still to be a Camp Hill, an alternative, something different for those who want to choose it. So we'd really urge people to go to the Action for Botton website, have a look at all the information on there, and just touch that donate button and send us £1 or 2.
Fantastic. Bertha was just on to say, it's amazing to me. She's in Spain, listening to us on Talk Radio Europe. The loss of £1 million due to government cutbacks, yet they're willing to pay for shift workers at far higher cost than was the case on the staffing beforehand. Madness, says Bertha, and that just sums it up really, doesn't it? It's lunacy, isn't it? It's bureaucratic lunacy. Well, please, Eddie and Catherine, stay in touch with the programme. I will tweet out all the information that you gave us. We'll put it on our website as well. And we know that people hearing this story tonight will want to, to help and contribute. If it's only a quid, as you said, it's very much worthwhile. It's an extraordinary thing. It's a throwback to a time, I think, when people cared more about one another than they do now. And I think you're to be commended, all of you. I think you're marvellous.
Thank you. Thank you, Richie.
And thanks for coming on the programme.
Thank you to all your listeners.
Not at all. Look after yourselves. Bye for now. Terrific there to hear Catherine von Stein and Eddie there on the line to us from Botton Village in North Yorkshire. And I will tweet out all of that information, like I said, in a few minutes' time. Amazing stuff. 3.5 minutes to the top of the hour. I'll be back in about 30 seconds' time.